Multicultural teams. Boy, are they fun. And they're an in thing among mission agencies and have been for about 15 years now, but they're a challenge at the same time. One of the exciting things about them is they can model the diversity of the body of Christ. What a cool thing when people work together in harmony. What a challenging thing to get it to where that really is a stage where every person feels they have a voice at the table and they have opportunity to be part of it. They can demonstrate of God's transforming power in intercultural relations, especially when they're living cross-culturally. People watch teams and see how they handle each other. They see how they respect each other. They learn from that. They can be either a great attractional point or a great distractional point as people watch them. They have an inbuilt heightened sensitivity to what is cultural about themselves. One of the biggest advantages of working on a cross-cultural team, especially when the team becomes really tight, is you never see yourself in the same way again. You learn in a healthy way to second-guess yourself. By God's grace, you learn how to listen and pay attention to what's being said to you. And you either change, or you better be ready to go back to a monocultural team. But people who have worked extensively on intercultural teams tend to get it in intercultural comm, even if they don't have the handles. Handles given through a course like this and specific ways of looking at things really make that come alive. But if you've been part of an intercultural team before coming in here, it's more alive for you than for people who haven't. Or I would say as well, if you've lived interculturally for a number of years, then suddenly what you've experienced makes sense. And if you're like me, you can think back more on the failure stories than the success stories and suddenly realize maybe there's a different explanation for what we went through there and what would have worked better for me. They may be less confused with political agents and so not being perceived as being subversive by the host country. If you're working in a country that is a creative access country and you're part of a multicultural team, multi-country team, so you're not all Americans but of diverse background, but you're from several countries, it's harder for people in your local setting to see you as CIA agents. And it's interesting when you're working in countries that no longer welcome missionaries and you're engaged in cross-cultural service for Christ of some type, if you're generating your own funding back at home, people see you coming in, living independently, no apparent income, and they wonder, who's paying you? If you're not independently wealthy, and often missionaries are not seen as independently wealthy because they're not living in the stratospheric type homes that demonstrate that. They're living more in middle class or upper middle class homes for the local society. Who do you work for? Oh, well, I'm an English teacher. Well, English teacher here can't afford that apartment. Or English teacher here, yeah, I see you've got an English teaching school there, but you have 3 students. And yet you have a car. You're gone visiting somewhere on a regular basis. You're living in a pretty nice home. You eat pretty well. Really, who do you work for? It's not surprising that people that work in Muslim settings often are seen as working for the CIA. And it's just assumed that that's the reality. They're an undercover agent. So one of the things to be careful with is, not to be careful with, one of the joys of being part of an intercultural team, a multinational team, is you're less likely to be confused working that. People will still say, you're strange, how does this work? I don't understand this. But if you're working with others from other countries, they're less likely to say, must be CIA, or must be U.S. State Department, or must be something like that. Again, just giving us a framework of understanding those. So areas of team building that are important to take into account: godly leadership. And though I don't typically use the term that often, I will turn to Ephesians and the 5 categories of leadership there as framed as godly leadership, but I would say I don't see that as the be-all and the end-all list of every type of leader in the church. Certainly they are spiritual leaders, but like most lists in the Pauline epistles, they're not intended to be exhaustive. They are intended to be representative. And what other types of leaders fit into these categories? Commitment to one another, which shows up in a multitude of ways. Perhaps one of the most important is how well do you listen to each other. That's where commitment really shows. Agreed to objectives. If your team has objectives, and that's always interesting for someone who's more future-oriented to not be the leader of a team which has a less future-oriented person. Where are we going? What are we doing? They want to know, especially if they're larger uncertainty avoidance. The ability to communicate well with each other. One of the challenges of an international team serving internationally is what language do you use? And often teams have decided it's best to use the host country national language, even though they might speak it at varying levels, even though some of them might be new enough that they don't speak it at all. But that doesn't give then any one language a privileged position with the rest of the languages around the table. Often if they don't speak in the language of the host country, English will be the language because it's more likely the common language of all the people there, even though English is not the #1 spoken language in the world by native speakers. It's #3. Mandarin is #1. And then I believe it's Hindi that might be #2. And I know Spanish and French are in there as well too. United in prayer. If your team is comprised of collectivists, they would value group prayer as well, rather than individual quiet times. In what sense are you catering to that need, praying together, coming together? Accountability. I've already mentioned the Korean study and the language related to accountability, so how you are accountable is important culturally. Remember the North American value around that word can, you can do it, or yes we can, versus the Korean accountability around the word must or obey. And so, is it a relational economic ability, or is it a policy economic? I'm not sure I described that, so I'll run through that quickly. One of the leaders at the organization said that's the difference between Korean and American approaches to accountability. Americans are policy accountability, which means you have a policy and you enforce it, period. Koreans, he said, are relational in their policy development. You have a policy, but you also have a relationship. And it's your relationship with the boss that determines whether policy is followed or not. Policy is more suggestive than imperative, versus the North American value of policy being not just suggestive but imperative. And in these days, accountability, especially in the financial end, with U.S. laws related to this, can get very strict, very tricky. And if you're in a partnership that has finances and you're having to report on behalf of your organization to the U.S. government how the money is being spent, and this is watched closely these days, make sure you understand how to communicate that to members of your team so that they know you're not just being a sticky American, but this is something you have to do because you will be in trouble and the organization will be in trouble if you don't. And then recognition of gifts. So this gifts goes beyond the leadership gifts that Ephesians 4 talks about. This is all the gifts of the Spirit. And I would say gifts that you don't see mentioned. A gift of music that you don't see listed among any of the Pauline gifts, but certainly that's a gift I've seen operating in the church. Would I call it a gift of the Spirit? I'd be real careful with that because, again, you don't see it scripturally. But is it a gift we see operating? Boy, do we ever. It's a gift I don't have, but in what ways are we enabling the gifts of the team members? For me, there's nothing more energizing than being asked to do something that fits into my sweet spot in terms of gifts and see it make a difference for a team. That's a true